All right, hello everybody. Cool. My name is Alan Thatcher. I work at Navy Federal Credit Union. If you read the description of what's there, that's a little ambitious for 20 minutes, so it'll be a very condensed version of what that said. But I'm here to talk about our year of automating AIX, Linux, and more, and how we've gone about that, and a little bit about our environment and what we've done. So, Navy Federal Credit Union. We were established in, I think it was 1933 by 7 people, and we're serving now over 7 million members. When I got there 4 years ago, I think it was 3 working on 4. So we're growing very, very fast, and we're the world's largest credit union. And so for the Chef project, we wanted to bring in and do our configuration automation. That was our intended goal for our Unix environment. And so the team of people that we have working on Chef is about 10 people. Currently, we have somewhere around 2,400 servers registered. A large portion of that is AIX, and so that's why I mentioned it in the talk. There's not a lot of discussion around AIX with Chef and automation, but it's actually really cool and works really well. For our configuration, we have around 130 cookbooks. We break those out into the individual pieces of things that we're trying to configure in individual repos and not a mono repo. Like I said, we're doing AIX and Linux, and recently we've broken through into some application installation and configuration stuff with our middleware team. IBM WebSphere specifically, if you know that term, that's what we're doing. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is culture, and why this is because we are what you would consider like an old school enterprise where you have the different silos and you have different teams, and the interactions between those teams can be very interesting, and the interactions within a team can also be very interesting. And so there's a few things that you just need to foster. Hopefully you have them, but they need to be fostered and brought about in order to enable your team to do these really cool things. So you need to be able to trust your team members, communicate openly, no secrets, and then set realistic goals. So for a little bit of entertainment, I have like some memes here. So we need to go from like the list of people I trust being very, very small to I trust you, right? So we need to have that idea that when we have these team members that are working on this automation with us, we trust that everybody wants the right thing. Right, so I know that I want the right thing, and maybe I know my best buddy wants the right thing, but we need to trust that everybody on the team wants the right thing, and that is generally true. We all work for the same organization. Its success is our success. So in sort of that old school mentality, I trust the things I wrote, I don't trust the things you wrote, and I don't want you to do it, I want me to do it. We need to get away from that and be everybody all involved. That being said, we need communication, right? So again, oftentimes we have this lack of communication amongst even team members where I know how I'm doing it and I'm going to do it my way and I'm not going to tell you how I did it. That might be in actual verbal communication, or I might write scripts and put them in my home directory and that's what I use, and you write scripts and put them in your home directory and that's what you use. That's a lack of communication, even though it's not verbally talking. It is a lack of communication in how you do things. And so you can get diverse patterns of how things are done if you don't have that communication. So you have to foster that communication among the team. And you need to be able to set goals that are aggressive but realistic. I just thought that was really cool, a knife on a Roomba running around. What kind of craziness could that cause? I don't know. But it seems like an interesting idea. Maybe if you have one, do that and let me know. So, but we have to set goals, right? So we have to set goals that we can achieve. Setting goals that are too aggressive, too early, will cause people to get discouraged and disillusioned in the process that you're going through. So as you have that trust in each other and you have that communication, as part of that, you start setting goals. And for Navy Federal Credit Union, our goal was to take all of the configuration at build time and on that we were doing for our AIX and Linux servers and automate that through Chef, and that was our project. So now we get down to the technology piece. And this is just a list. I don't have any memes for this. But there's a lot of things that you have to be aware of when you start down this role. And I'm assuming if you're here, having read what the description was, that you're in a like situation, right? So you have some of these things that aren't new and shiny, right? So if you say AIX to somebody, most of the time they're not going to know what you're talking about. and that's cool. It's just not very widely used, but it does exist, and we have to have it, right? And if you say, I don't have access to the cloud, a lot of people will look at you and say, how do you do your job? If your servers can't talk to the internet, how can they download this random thing and install it? Because it's better if it doesn't, right? So we don't have, we have to consider what we're doing. So we have to consider the environment, right? And including the people, and we talked about that. But we have to consider that environment. So at Navy Federal, our environment is very disconnected. So if you're used to living in the cloud, you may not understand exactly what I'm talking about. But we have we have our servers out there, our virtual machines. They're out there living, but they're firewalled off, not only just from the internet, but from each other, right? So things become a little bit harder and a little bit more difficult, and you might have to develop ways to work around that, and we have done that. I'll talk about that a little bit also. But we also have to realize that no one tool is going to solve everything. So when we say we're going to enter into this Chef project, it's going to involve more things than just Chef, right? And you have to understand that, and you have to be willing to accept that you're going to have to change more than one thing. So in our environment, like I said, it's very disconnected. It's very shut off from everything. Our workstations, we can't just install whatever, right? So we have to go through a very long, stringent process just for that, and we have to be able to work around those things. So again, no one tool will solve everything, and the one thing that didn't work for us was Test Kitchen, right? And so this is just an example of something that we did to work around our restrictions, right? So Test Kitchen is great. You say you want to spin up a Linux virtual machine and you want to run all your tests on that locally on your workstation. But what happens if you can't install things on your workstation? What happens if that thing's not approved? What happens if maybe you can put a server in there and you can install something on a server, but then it can't reach out to the internet to download stuff? So you have all these different problems, and you have to be able to overcome them, and that's considering their environment. So what we had to figure out how to do was have a good test suite without having that normal thing, that one tool, right? So you get Chef, that Chef DK is part of it, that's the one tool type thing. So we had to figure out how to solve that. And we did that by testing on static environments. So everybody sort of has a dev environment that they can play with, and from our central Chef DK workstation, we just use SSH, right? So we bypass that virtual part, and we just use standard tools to be able to do testing. So that's part of realizing that not one tool is going to solve everything, and that you might have to do a little bit of innovation in sort of those old school environments, right? And that flows into, don't be afraid to adapt best practice to what will actually work, right? So best practice is doing tests, right? We have to test the stuff we're writing. We can't just write something and throw it into production. So we have to be able to adapt what we're doing to our situations. But the next point, don't stray too far from best practices, right? So we have this test it thing that we built where we're testing our code, but it works in the same way. So just because we have an environment, or you have an environment that is hard, doesn't mean that you can't do things that are sensible and reasonable. So so that flows into use patterns that work for your situations, and what that comes down to is how you're going to implement something. So the way we have Chef implemented, we have a Chef server. We use roles and environments because that matches how our stuff works. So just because you go somewhere and you see somebody using Chef and maybe they use policy files, don't know if anybody in here uses policy files, but just because that works in one environment doesn't mean it's going to work in every environment, right? So you have to use patterns that work for your particular situation. And the last part, and the part that sort of bites, I think, people in the very beginning, is overcomplication breeds under cooperation. So if you try and make things too complicated, all that being said, if you try and make things too complicated and change, like if somebody's doing something in one way yesterday, and then you've completely changed everything today, and they have no idea what you're talking about, and you haven't introduced that, and you just come in and you say, oh, I have this brand new shiny thing, and just use it this way, and forget everything you knew, you're going to have people who don't want to participate in that. So those are some of the things that we went through. I much rather have questions. If you guys have questions about our environment, I mean, I can go on talking, but if you guys have any questions about how we do things, or how we how we've solved different problems, I'd be happy to answer them, or I'll just keep going and tell you how we do it. So what do we use for managing secrets? We're entering into that. So right now we don't have anything special that's not chef related for managing secrets. So we're going to implement HashiCorp Vault, but that's not something that we currently have. But that's what our plan is to go with that. AIX testing. I'm glad you asked that. So that goes back to that what I was talking about with not being able to use Test Kitchen, right? So one of the things that is super hard about working with this stuff with AIX is just that you don't have the ability to do something like Kitchen and just spin something up. You can't run a AIX VM on your machine. So it becomes difficult in how to do that. So what we have is this thing, and I'll tell you a brief story about it. So I was working one Wednesday trying to figure out how to do this, right? And I was trying to use Test Kitchen, and there's different things that you can use, and we could talk about that offline. But it got really annoying at one point in time, and so I said, well, forget this. I'm just going to do something else. So what I did was I just wrote some simple bash scripts, right? And so from the machine that we're coding on, we run test it, and it does exactly what Test Kitchen does. So I guess what I'm saying is you can use the tools that exist, and so what it uses, though, is SSH to go out to the AIX server. It downloads the cookbooks that need to be run from our GitHub appliance, and then it runs Chef Zero, right? And if there's any inspect tests in the cookbook, it'll run those, and you get all that output just like you would expect from Test Kitchen, and it's just as useful as Test Kitchen, but it is on just machines that exist, right? And we rebuild those as we need to. So I might rebuild my machine 27 times a day, but we have Power VC for being able to do that, so we can easily rebuild those things. So the question is, do we use a lot of custom resources, or do we use the public community AIX cookbook? So the answer to that is, in general, we don't use a lot of the public cookbooks. And AIX is one where we do have it in there, and we use a couple resources out of it. But recently, in upgrading to 14, a lot of that stuff was behind time, so I sort of stole them out of there and put them in our own custom cookbook. But in general, in our environment, we write our own custom cookbooks to do almost everything. It's some things are just too complicated. You know, they include too many scenarios that we don't have anything to do with, and so we can just write it a little bit easier if we just do it ourselves. So how do we do our development? So that's one of the things that is part of that whole culture change, right? Where you start to trust people and you start to communicate. So before, you have individuals who are writing scripts to do these things and do these installations and configurations and configuration changes. And one of the big changes that we had was we brought in a GitHub appliance. Everything is internal. It's a bank, and if you're a member of Navy Federal, super happy that we keep everything internal. And so we've moved all of that into a GitHub, collaborative type of development. And so we have a review of somebody updates code or writes a new cookbook. It goes through a review, and somebody has to look at that and approve that, and then it gets pushed out. So who's reviewing the work, right? So who's reviewing the work? We have a set of people within our team. So I can't review my own work, but we have a group of people who are assigned sort of to be those people who see the pull request and go in and look at them and do the review. So it's within the team, and it's an assigned group of those people. So, all right. So thanks for listening. And like I said, that's a really condensed version of what I wanted to talk about. So if you have any other questions about any of the things that I mentioned or anything at all, just find me. I'll be around. I'll be there tonight at the celebration. So thanks for listening, and have a good.